For this next section of 1-1, we're going to talk about positive and negative intervals. So positive interval is where the graph is above the x-axis. This is referring strictly to the function values. Remember, on a graph, that's the y coordinates of our graph. Those have to be greater than 0. And then the negative intervals occur when the graph is below the x-axis. So when our y coordinates are smaller than 0 or negative numbers. Okay, so when we're strictly referring to y is positive, y is negative, we're always going to answer these questions using the domain values. So we have the graph of x squared minus 9. So that's a parabola that has a vertex at 0, -9. And so looking at our graph, the x-intercepts are where the graph crosses the x-axis. And so we want to identify those to kind of help us go through these intervals. So this graph is crossing the x-axis at -3, 0, and at 3, 0. And then it's got a y-intercept. It's crossing the y-axis at 0, -9 at its vertex for this problem. So we'll notice that those x-intercepts will come into play when we're talking about our positive and negative intervals, because we're relating it to, that is not a straight line. We're relating it to our x-axis. So if we look at our graph on our x-axis at our x-intercepts, notice that the section that is below our x-axis is this portion of our graph. So those all have negative y values. And so the way that we're going to answer this is by identifying what domain values have these negative range values. Okay, so if I look at my graph, the under part starts at my x-intercept on the left, and it ends on at my x-intercept on the right. So the negative interval occurs from those values. So from -3 of my domain all the way until +3 of my domain. Notice that I'm using parentheses for this because the value at -3 and at +3 are exactly 0. The definition of a negative interval is that it's less than 0. So notice not equal to. That means when we're doing our positive interval as well, our x-intercepts are not going to be included because that value is 0, not greater than 0. So what's left of our graph should be positive. And if we notice, so over here to the left of our -3, I'm just going to make that number a little bigger so we can see it. And those values are positive for our y. Remember that with a quadratic, I could keep going forever and ever and ever. And so that means that my domain is infinite. So remember that for a quadratic, the domain always goes from -infinity to +infinity because my pattern can keep continuing forever. And so I can increase those x values infinitely. So my positive interval on the left-hand side goes all the way forever on the left, but stops at -3. And so the way that I represent that interval is that it's going to go from negative infinity to that -3 value. Remember, it's not included because it's not, it's equal to 0, not greater than 0. And my second interval, notice over on this side, starts at our other x-intercept 3 and then goes on forever. So it's positive, it's above the x-axis on the right side of +3. So really that's going to look like the opposite of our first interval. So our answer is going to go from +3 to +infinity. So remember that when we're looking at this, we're looking at when are the y values positive, and we're answering with our corresponding domain values.